and thanks to At Home for joining us this hour. We start tonight actually with some breaking news out of a federal court case in Florida. You will remember that between the 2016 presidential election and the subsequent inauguration of Donald Trump, in January of 2017, the news organization BuzzFeed published this document, which soon came to be known as the Steele dossier, the Christopher Steele dossier. This is a document that, at the time, some reporters had seen, or at least they'd seen parts of it. Parts of this document, or perhaps all of it, had been handed over to the FBI and over to the State Department. This document had also been briefed, at least in part, to the incoming president. Remember that dramatic scene in James Comey's book where he talks about going in one-on-one and briefing President-elect Donald Trump on the content and the nature and, most importantly, the existence of this dossier, which was starting to circulate. So it was around in various circumstances, but BuzzFeed was the first to make it available to the general public when they published it online in January 2017. And to put it mildly, their publication of that dossier exploded like a freaking fireball, right? I mean, it had, you will recall, this awkward and still difficult to talk about front page allegation that President-elect Donald Trump had engaged in some very specific extracurricular behavior in a Moscow hotel room that had been videotaped and was being used to leverage or blackmail him. That allegation about that supposedly videotaped behavior by the president and Russia holding it over him, that obviously got the most attention because of the nature of that allegation. And that specific allegation has never really gone anywhere in the interim couple of years. But as reporter Matthew Rosenberg notes at the New York Times tonight, a lot of the other stuff in the dossier, certainly the headline stuff in the dossier, did ultimately pan out. Quote, parts of the dossier have proved prescient. Its main assertion that the Russian government was working to get Mr. Trump elected was hardly an established fact when it was first laid out by Christopher Steele in his first memo in June 2016. But that has since been backed up by the United States' own intelligence agencies and by Robert Mueller's investigation. The dossier's talk of Russian efforts to cultivate some people in Mr. Trump's orbit was similarly unknown when first detailed in one of Christopher Steele's reports, but it has proved broadly accurate as well. When BuzzFeed published the Steele dossier, so everybody could read it, though, there was one Russian guy who was mentioned on the final page of the dossier who went beyond just complaining about the document being published or denying that the claims about him in the dossier were true. There was this one guy who was not known in the United States at all, but who was mentioned in the dossier and described as sort of having a bank shot role in this whole scheme. He went so far as to actually file an American lawsuit, a defamation case in federal court in Florida against BuzzFeed, basically trying to destroy them as an entity as punishment for BuzzFeed publishing this dossier, which he said contained allegations about him that were not true. So this Russian guy files that defamation lawsuit against BuzzFeed in February of 2017, right after BuzzFeed publishes the dossier. Ultimately, BuzzFeed prevailed in that case. A judge dismissed the defamation case from this Russian guy just this past December. The court found that BuzzFeed's decision to publish the dossier was lawful, it was not defamatory, threw the case out. Well, last week on this show, you might remember me giving you sort of a heads up that there might be some potentially interesting new information, some potentially interesting new fallout from that lawsuit after its dismissal. Because even though the case has been dismissed and it is done in court, there has been some additional legal wrangling about whether the materials produced in that case would be kept secret indefinitely, or whether the materials produced over the course of the fight over that case, whether they would now be made public. Well, bingo. That's what we got tonight. Tonight, that slot machine finally paid out its jackpot. Because tonight, the court unsealed this report, which was created by the guy whose name you see on screen there. He's not a famous person, but he's the former chief of staff of the FBI's cyber division. He's the former director for cyber incident response at the National Security Council at the White House. He's now the head of a cybersecurity company that was hired in the course of this lawsuit to investigate whether the Steele dossier was true. Not all of it, but specifically the part of it that was the basis of this lawsuit. As I mentioned, it's on the last page of the Steele dossier, as published by BuzzFeed, where this Russian guy and his tech firm are described as having an important technical role in the Russian attack on our election in 2016. And you sort of have to read through the redactions of various kinds to get there. But what the Steele dossier said about this guy was over the period from March 2016 to September 2016, his company and its affiliates had been using botnets and porn traffic to transmit viruses, plant bugs, steal data, and conduct altering operations against the Democratic Party's leadership. Entities linked to blank were involved, and he and another hacking expert, both recruited under duress by the FSB, were significant players in this operation. So the guy whose companies were described that way in that part of the Steele dossier, he's the one who filed this defamation lawsuit against BuzzFeed right after BuzzFeed published the dossier. And this other guy, who was the chief of staff of the FBI's cyber division, top cyber incident response guy at the National Security Council, he was hired by BuzzFeed as part of them fighting this lawsuit to produce a report, look at the data, and produce an expert report, basically to determine whether those allegations in the dossier about that guy and the botnets and the porn traffic and how exactly they used that stuff to get at these Democratic documents, they hired that expert guy to determine whether those allegations in the dossier were true. Right? Because that's a key point of fighting a defamation case. You can't sue someone for saying bad things about you if the bad things they're saying about you are true. So, I mean, the lesson here for all of us is don't sue somebody for defamation unless you're absolutely sure that the thing they're saying about you is a lie, because the discovery process in a defamation lawsuit will ultimately turn up the truth about whether those terrible allegations against you that you didn't want anybody to hear, that you're so mad about them, you're suing about them. Eventually, in this defamation case, it will come out whether or not those bad things about you are in fact true. Because if they're true, somebody can legally say it about you, no matter how bad it makes you look. I know these things and I can riff on them off the top of my head because I basically got that all printed out on a rubber stamp in my office, which I use as a response to everybody who contacts me to complain about something I say about them on this show. I'm terribly sorry, but it's true. Stamp. Get me the next one. We now know, because this expert report has been unsealed tonight after that lawsuit ran its course in Florida, we now know that, at least according to this guy from the National Security Council and the top cyber guy at the FBI, we now know that what it says in the Christopher Steele dossier about those Russian botnets and the porn traffic and viruses and bugs and how those were used to steal data in the Russian operation against the Democratic Party, according to this expert report, that stuff in the dossier broadly is true. Quote, technical evidence suggests that Russian cyber espionage groups used XBT infrastructure to support malicious spear phishing campaigns against the Democratic Party leadership, which resulted in the theft of emails from a senior member of the Hillary Clinton presidential campaign. Technical evidence suggests that the Russian cyber espionage group that's linked to the DNC hack has used an XBT-owned IP address. XBT affiliate-owned infrastructure was used to support the malicious spear phishing attack of Democratic Party leadership in 2016, which resulted in the theft and subsequent publication of sensitive information related to the Clinton campaign. So, you know, this is the spear phishing attack on John Podesta. This is Fancy Bear and Cozy Bear, the two different Russian intelligence groups that were conducting the attack, and how they did it. I mean, what this technical report that we've now had unsealed out of that lawsuit, what it suggests is that, at least in this part of the dossier, Christopher Steele was right. As the New York Times sums it up tonight, quote, a report by a former FBI cyber expert unsealed in a federal court in Miami finds evidence that suggests Russian agents used networks operated by the guy who sued BuzzFeed, Mr. Gubarev, to start their hacking operation during the 2016 presidential campaign. Quote, the report's suggestions of a link between Mr. Gubarev and Russian hacking is likely to spur new demands for renewed investigations. It has long been fascinating to me that Republicans and the Trump White House have focused on Christopher Steele and the Steele dossier as if it is embarrassing or bad somehow that that document and his work might in any way have been a predicate for the larger Russia investigation and ultimately the special counsel. I mean, honestly, bits and pieces of the dossier keep getting proven true all the time. Nothing in it has been conclusively disproven at all. And, I mean, flip through it again sometime. I mean, you know, I don't understand why Republicans in the White House keep drawing people's attention back to the dossier. Really? You want people to read the dossier? What it says about the Trump campaign and Trump himself is not good, and bits and pieces of it keep being proven true. Now, we think, but we are not sure, that there may yet be more unsealed documents that derive from this case in Florida. But this piece of it unsealed tonight, verifying the only real technical stuff in the dossier about the Russian attack on our election and the Russian attack on the Democrats, that is new as of tonight. So very interesting news. New York Times was first to break it, but that report is available to everybody because it's been posted publicly by the court.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.